Everybody, thanks for joining today. I'm just going to get things set up and give people a couple minutes to log in, and then we'll get started. Somebody give me a thumbs up that they can see my screen. Okay, perfect. All right, it looks like we have a good number of folks, so in the interest of time, we'll just go ahead and get started. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Kara Renston. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the MVP Grant Program Director. And we are thrilled to announce the opening of the EEA Environment and Climate One Stop, or the ECO One Stop for short. And we are having this informational session to talk about the open grant opportunity. So before we get into some more specifics, I wanted to pass it over to our Undersecretary for Environment, Stephanie Cooper, who's going to say some words of welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. As Kara said, we're super excited about this program and having released the application with the goal of streamlining and making our grant process easier for all of you. As folks know, we've been busy over the past several months getting ready for this, making sure that we did everything we can to make it go smoothly. So developing our combined streamline application, putting out the procurement documents that you've all seen, building out our new grant management system to be able to align with this application. We've partnered with EEA's Office of Environmental Justice and Equity to pilot the new Mass EnviroScreen tool as part of this grant round. We're going to talk more about that today as part of this presentation. And then, of course, going through the expression of interest process. So doing feedback calls with potential applicants. We were really excited and somewhat amazed to see 541 submissions from 286 different applicants. Our team held over 260 feedback calls between October and January. And we're really, heartened by all of the interest and glad to be able to give applicants feedback on your project ideas across all the programs. So, we're feeling good. We're motivated by all the positive and constructive feedback we've received about the ECO One Stop, and really invite you to continue to do that as we undergo this pilot round. That's how we're going to that's how we're going to make this be as successful as possible in the future. So just thank you so much for your time and engagement to build a successful program. I'll turn it back to you, Kara.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary. Appreciate your support with this. So in terms of some other introductions, I'm just going to briefly explain who is on the ECO One Stop kind of staff leadership team. So in addition to the incredible program staff from all 7 programs that are part of the ECO One Stop, myself, and then Bill Hinckley, who's our EEA grants manager, Nick Bulens, who runs our dams and seawalls program, Emily Gagne, who's our climate team fellow, and then also Maya Mansfield, who's our assistant secretary for resilience, have all been kind of taking a leadership role on the ECO One Stop. And it's been great to collaborate across all of our different programs on this. So in terms of our agenda for today, we are going to do an overview of the ECO One Stop as well as the timeline for the grant opportunity, and do a quick summary of the expressions of interest, which Undersecretary Cooper already started. We're also going to do an overview of the ECO One Stop request for responses, which is the formal procurement document that's posted to Combis, as well as the application. And that includes different components, including the grants catalog that applicants can use when applying for the ECO One Stop, and I'll talk about that and how to use that later. The grants management system, which is our new software at EEA that everybody will be using to submit their application. So we'll go over that. And then we also have a specific webinar on that tomorrow that I hope you have registered for to learn more about that system. We also will be talking more about how we are going to be piloting the Mass EnviroScreen tool with the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. And my colleague Saina from that office is going to be talking more about that tool a little bit later on in the presentation. And then, of course, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. And we'll be documenting the questions and answers to post on to Combis as well. If you could please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you have, that would be most appreciated. We aren't going to be taking any like verbal questions, so you can disregard the raised hand function that's at the bottom of the screen. And then I also just wanted to mention that the webinar is being recorded so that we can post it to the website so that others who may not have been able to come today can reference it at a later date. So just stepping back a moment to talk about the big picture of the Environment and Climate One Stop. Again, it aims to make applying for grant funding easier and more efficient for our constituents. So it streamlines the grant application process into a single point of entry, like the Common App for college students. It aligns program requirements and application questions as much as possible. It links projects to the best source of funding. It implements a key strategic priority of the Resilient Mass Finance Strategy. We are hoping to grow it over time to include more programs at EEA. And then we are also inspired by and learning from the Economic Development Community One Stop for Growth. And I'll just mention, because there was a question on this yesterday, that it's separate from the Economic Development Community One Stop for Growth. So there are different grant programs that are included in the ECO One Stop. So if you were going to apply to that, you also need to apply for that portal as well. So these are the 7 programs that are included in the ECO One Stop this year in this pilot round. So we have MVP action grants, and then we have our Coastal Zone Management Office's Coastal Resilience and Coastal Habitat and Water Quality grants. We also have EEA's Cooling Corridors, Planning Assistance, and Dams and Seawalls grants. And we have the Division of Ecological Restoration's Culvert Replacement Municipal Assistance and Training Site Initiative. And we chose these programs for the pilot round because there is a lot of overlap between the grant programs in terms of applications and what types of projects folks are applying to. And so kind of putting these together hopefully will really help you all who are applying this round only have to apply once for your various projects to all of these programs. Also important to note that even though we're putting everybody on one application, the eligibility requirements for each individual program in terms of what entities are eligible to apply remain the same as in previous years. So if you have questions about which programs your entity is able to apply to, you can reference this chart. We'll post the slide deck, and then this is also available on our website as well and in various resources. And one of the great things about the GMS system is that we're going to actually be able to filter you to the right programs depending on what type of entity you are. So that is one thing that the GMS is able to accomplish. So in terms of a timeline, we opened the RFR last week, and now we are having these webinars this week. So we had one yesterday, as well as the one right now. We are also having our grants management system specific webinar tomorrow from 10 to 11. So please register to attend that one if you haven't already. We also have some office hours for the Draft Mass EnviroScreen tool that we're piloting through this, this grant opportunity. And we actually, in response to Some feedback we received yesterday added a new office hour that's next week because some folks were eager to already dive in. And so that registration is also on our website, and we just sent out an announcement about it so that you can register to sign up for that office hour if you would like to. And then we have deadlines for questions to be submitted. So any questions that you have about the RFR or the application, please send them to ecoonestop@mass.gov by February 18th. And then we will be compiling the answers to the questions and posting them to Combis by February 25th. Again, we can't answer project-specific questions at this time. And then after the 18th, we won't be able to answer questions about the RFR or the application. So please make sure that you submit your questions by that date. Our application is set to close on March 20th at 11:59. I'll say this probably 5 times throughout this presentation, but please do not submit your application at 11:59. We, again, are piloting this new software. There's lots of piloting going on here, so please make sure that you are submitting your application, hopefully a day or two before that. But at least before business hours close on that day, so that we can make sure that there is limited amounts of stress for you all and us. And then the last thing on the timeline here is that we are hoping to announce awards in the summer with funding allocated and projects underway as close to the beginning of the fiscal year as possible, so July 2026. This slide shows a summary of our expression of interest opportunity. I think this was also a question that came up yesterday, so I just wanted to point out that you did not need to have submitted an EOI in order to apply in this formal application round. But we encouraged people to do so that they could get feedback on their application ideas and hopefully come back with a strong application. So we opened that expression of interest period in September, and we received 541 submissions from 286 different applicants. Our team held approximately 261 feedback calls between October and January, and many of those feedback calls included a lot of people, including lots of different people from the applicant, as well as multiple different program staff on our end to make sure that you were getting feedback on all the programs that we thought that you would be eligible for. And then just a little tidbit that the most common project types were culvert or small bridge upgrade or removal and stormwater management, but we did receive EOIs that really spanned all the different types of projects that are eligible for all the programs in the one-stop. So this diagram sort of helps me organize the rest of this presentation. So I'm going to talk about 3 different components of this grant opportunity. The most detailed one, and the thing that is sort of the official procurement document that's on Combis, is called the request for responses. And that includes information about every participating grant program, as well as timelines, eligibility, the evaluation criteria that each program are going to use when scoring applications, et cetera. So we do encourage you to skim this document, and especially that for the different programs that you are eligible to apply to. But we did also try to consolidate it into a digest that we're calling the grants catalog. That gives you sort of the information you need to know as you fill out the application. And there is a new component of the grants catalog that's on our website. There's actually like an Excel table that will walk you through each of the core questions of the application and how to answer those questions for each of the programs that you're applying to. So I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And then finally, the top of the pyramid is the application itself, again, accessed in the new grants management system. And I'll talk more about that as well. So this is our website. The amazing Marissa Robertson, who's our MVP Deputy Director, put this together for us, and it has all of our resources, everything that you need to know, including the grants catalog, the links to all of the webinars and office hours, FAQs, everything you need is on this website. So please visit it often. In terms of the request for responses, so again, that's the official procurement document that's posted to Combis. It includes a general section at the beginning that has requirements for all the ECO one-stop programs and goes over items like eligibility, match, contract duration, etc. Each program also has its own section at the end with program-specific requirements. And then there are a few attached a Word document with the example application, so you can see the questions before you log into the GMS or reference them that way if you would like. We also have the scope and budget spreadsheet that's required for all applicants attached to the Combis document. You'll also be able to download that through the GMS, but we wanted to have it there as well. And then there is also that grants catalog question guidance spreadsheet that I referenced earlier that is also attached to the Combis posting. In terms of some significant changes to note for this pilot round of ECO One Stop, the first one is the match requirement. So we are streamlining match across all of the different programs so that it is now a 10% local match required. And it's going to be calculated based on the amount of grant funding. If you have applied to MVP in the past, you know we used to do it through the total project cost, but now we are switching to grant funding because we've gotten some feedback that that is more intuitive for folks as they put together their budgets. So as an example, if a project is requesting $100,000 in grant funds, it will need $10,000 in match. You can accomplish this match through in-kind, like applicant staff time or cash match. And then importantly, no match is required for rural and small towns as designated by the Office of Rural Affairs and tribal governments. The next thing that I'll point to is for culvert and small bridge replacement projects, the use of a designer that is pre-qualified by the MassDOT Architects and Engineers Review Board and basic bridge design and rating is strongly encouraged for any design work valued above $50,000. The reason for this is that we want you to be eligible for as many state programs as possible, including the MassDOT programs for this work, and that is a requirement for them. So we want to move towards this to make sure that everybody is, again, eligible for as much as possible. Again, it's going to be strongly encouraged this round, so we can kind of slowly make this change, but we are expecting to potentially make it required in upcoming rounds. So I wanted to flag that for everybody doing that kind of work. Another big change is the Mass EnviroScreen. So if you attended some of our pre-RFR webinars, there was an MVP one and a few other programs had them as well. You will have seen the preview of this, and we'll be going over it again today with my colleague from the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. So basically piloting this new state tool that's going to identify burdened areas and communities. And then we have our grants management system as our other big change, and our applications will be required to be submitted through the GMS. Also, a question came up about this, so I wanted to note it here as well. Please note that only expenses that are incurred after the contract is in place, if you're awarded, will be eligible for reimbursement. So we don't reimburse for anything that is prior to the contract execution date. So in terms of the application, there are several different sections once you log in and are applying on the GMS. So there's a section on application information that will be required for all applicants. There is a section on eligibility, where the responses to those questions will dictate which programs appear in your eligible program section. Then you'll make it to the eligible program section, and it will list the programs that may be a good fit for your project. You'll be able to add or remove programs on that page. So if you review the program and decide that it's not actually a good fit, you can remove it there and not have to answer specific questions about that program. Importantly, if you don't see the program that you thought you wanted to apply to on that page, the best thing to do is to go back to the previous page, select Other as your project type, and then proceed, because you'll get the full list of grants that you can then add or remove that you're eligible for. So once you select the programs that you'll be applying to, you will go through the core questions, which are the questions that you're going to answer regardless of grant program. So everybody applying is going to be answering these questions. And then you'll move to the program-specific questions, which are unique to each grant program that you selected. And then finally, you'll be reviewing and submitting. So other important notes include the fact that an attachment may be optional in the core questions, but required in the program-specific section. So if you're asked to upload an attachment multiple times, don't be alarmed, just go ahead and do it. And then the other thing to note is, again, do not leave submitting until the last minute. If you miss a question, it could take you a while to figure out where you missed it and correct that. Also, the GMS pages may take a moment to load. And so we want to make sure that you have plenty of time to do so. All right, so just a very quick advertisement really for tomorrow's webinar. So this is the grant management system that we'll be using. You can sign up easily at mymass.gov. Or mymass.gov, sorry. One of the important things is that you'll be creating a business account, not a personal one. So when you get to that selection, please make sure that you're selecting business account. And we will be going over all of this in more detail tomorrow, and we'll also be recording and posting that webinar. We also have lots of resources on how to use the GMS, how to sign up for the GMS. There are links on this slide, and again, we'll be going over more of those tomorrow. And now I just want to talk about the grants catalog. So this is that resource that will help you when applying to the different grant programs that you are eligible for in the One Stop. So there's just descriptions of all of the programs already on our webpage. And then we also added this spreadsheet that I talked about before. So there's a snippet of that spreadsheet on this slide, and you'll see all the core questions are listed on the column at the furthest left. So for example, if you are on the problems to be addressed question, and you are applying for MVP action in dams and seawalls, you would look at the boxes for both of those programs and see what each of those programs is interested in you writing about in your answer to that question. Make sure that you hit on all of those bullets in your answers. All right. So now we're going to transition to talk a little bit more about the Mass EnviroScreen tool. And again, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Saina in a moment, but I just wanted to provide a little bit more context. So again, we're excited to be piloting this tool with our Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. When we created the term priority populations many years ago, it was because we were lacking a way to discuss all the attributes that could make communities more vulnerable to climate impacts. There were many communities who did not have EJ identified block groups, but did have folks that were more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change for a variety of reasons, including things like health. And now this gap is being addressed through this Mass EnviroScreen tool. It's a new tool being designed to identify areas experiencing overlapping environmental, climate, and social vulnerabilities. And for this grant application, references to EJ populations will be replaced with burdened areas to reflect this cumulative place-based approach. So Mass EnviroScreen was initially being developed by the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity in response to the 2024 Climate Act, which introduced new requirements to consider cumulative impacts in clean energy siting and permitting decisions. The tool supports these analyses by providing a consistent framework for understanding how multiple stressors intersect in specific places. So by applying the same lens within the grant process, Massachusetts aims to better align program design and decision making with its EJ commitments and ensure that resources and benefits are responsive to communities facing the highest cumulative burdens. So again, we're going to be piloting this new tool in the grant space through this round of Eco One Stop, and we look forward to your feedback on this. And Saina will show you how to submit any feedback you have. And then I also wanted to mention that the decision to pilot this tool through One Stop was made recently. So if you haven't heard about it yet, you didn't miss anything. It's just that the decision was made recently. And so you're hearing the information now, and we encourage you to attend the office hours that we've set up to get to know more about the tool and have your questions answered. And I just want to reiterate that the Mass EnviroScreen tool will be utilized in the same way that the EJ map was to help identify if proposed projects are located in and benefiting burdened and vulnerable communities. Your project does not need to be in a burdened area to be eligible for the Eco One Stop. That's a really important thing to note. Still apply for any projects that your community wants to pursue. It's just going to be used the exact same way that the EJ map was in terms of our evaluation of our applications. So now I'm going to turn it over to Saina for an explanation of the tool.
Thank you, Kara, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saina Mashmasarmi, and I'm an environmental justice liaison within the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity, and I'll be talking through the Mass EnviroScreen in a little bit more detail. As Kara mentioned, the Mass EnviroScreen is a new statewide environmental justice screening tool developed by OEJE, and it is a GIS mapping tool that will identify communities in Massachusetts where high levels of pollution and climate burdens overlap with high levels of social vulnerability. And the tool has been designed to provide quantitative information and data in a more transparent and accessible way that is useful for communities and can be leveraged by communities to better understand local conditions, support advocacy and community organizing, and strengthen grant applications. Next slide, please. So the Mass EnviroScreen is comprised of 30 different indicators which are used to characterize pollution and climate burden and population characteristics. But those two larger categories can be broken down into 5 smaller components or subcategories. And under pollution and climate burden, there are 3 components, which include environmental exposure indicators, which are based on measurements of different types of pollution that people may come into contact with. This includes indicators such as rates of air pollutants, like fine particulate matter and ozone. We also have environmental effects indicators, which are based on the locations of toxic chemicals in or near communities that can cause adverse environmental conditions. This category includes indicators like proximity to hazardous waste sites or impaired water bodies. And lastly, we have climate risk indicators, which speak to a community's level of exposures to climate hazards and includes indicators like flood risk and extreme heat. The last 2 components on the slide are what are considered to be population characteristics and describe conditions that can make people or communities more vulnerable to those burdens. And this includes components or categories such as sensitive population indicators, which measure the prevalence of physiological or health conditions in a community. Sensitive population indicators capture health factors such as rates of pediatric asthma and premature mortality. And we also have socioeconomic factors, which are indicators that capture conditions that may increase people's stress or make healthy living difficult and decrease capacity to adapt. And in this category, we are looking at things like linguistic isolation and rates of poverty and unemployment. You'll notice that these components and the indicators included within are intentionally oriented towards community and health well-being. And this people-centered focus reflects one of the core values of environmental justice in ensuring that cumulative impacts on communities are considered alongside other types of environmental protection and resilience analyses. And this tool is intended to complement other aspects of the grant application to provide a more comprehensive picture of cumulative impact. Next slide, please. To make this data comparable across the state, the tool translates each indicator into standardized scores. So for each indicator, Mass EnviroScreen assigns a percentile value for each census block group. And this percentile shows how a community compares to all others statewide for each indicator. These individual percentiles are then combined into a cumulative burden score for each census block group. And through this process, higher scores will indicate communities experiencing greater pollution burden, climate risk, and social vulnerability. Communities will then be considered burden areas when it meets one or both of the following criteria. So they either have a mass and virus screen score at or above the 75th percentile, or the annual median household income for that census block group is 65% or less of the statewide median. Next slide. As Kara mentioned, the Mass and Bioscreen is being piloted through the Eco One Stop program, and as the tool undergoes finalization, we welcome your feedback and suggestions. For the purposes of this RFR, the draft version of Mass and Bioscreen that is available online will be used to identify burden areas. Designations in effect at the time of the RFR's release will be respected and applied consistently throughout the grant evaluation process. And accordingly, Mass and Bioscreen will be referenced as draft within this RFR to reflect its ongoing development. The Mass and Bioscreen will be utilized the same way the EJ map was to identify if proposed projects are located in and benefiting burdened and vulnerable communities. But it's important to note that a community not identified as a burdened area may still exhibit elevated percentile values for individual indicators. And in these cases, applicants are encouraged to review Mass and Bioscreen at the indicator level to better understand localized conditions, and if useful, explain how their project is benefiting those more vulnerable individuals within the census block group. And so to reiterate, each grant program will incorporate the Mass and Bioscreen into their project scoring the same way that was previously done for the EJ and priority population designations. Next slide. On this slide is a screenshot of the Mass and Bioscreen web application, and we thought it would be helpful to walk through screenshots of the application as there is a lot of more information available on this tool than was on the EJ map. But when you first click into the tool, a text pop-up will provide a summary of what Mass and Bioscreen is and how it is developed. And within that overview is a link to the technical documentation, which is labeled as technical documentation. But this document will be an important resource as it explains the indicators in detail, the data sources, and the context behind the data captured by the tool. The map will highlight all areas designated as burden areas in red, and this is often the first view people will see when they access the tool and is useful for orientation, but it's only the starting point. Next slide, please. This slide shows a census block group in Pittsfield that has been designated as a burdened area. When you click on any census block group, burdened area or not, a full table listing the raw value and percentile for each indicator will appear, and these indicators are separated by category. For our purposes, I've zoomed in on the socioeconomic indicators to look more closely at how the data is presented, and you'll see here that for each indicator, you'll see both a raw value and a percentile. For the application's purposes, it is the percentile which is the most relevant, as a percentile will tell you how this block group compares to other block groups across Massachusetts. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll see a census block group in Provincetown, and you'll notice that the area is not designated as a burdened area overall, but when we look more closely, we can see that there are still elevated indicators, specifically within the population characteristics category. And when we zoom in on the sensitive population indicators, again, we see both raw values and percentiles, but it is the percentiles which is most relevant. So even though this census block group does not meet the threshold for a burden designation, certain indicators are elevated relative to the rest of the state. In this case, it is adult high blood pressure, which has a percentile of 98.43, and adult cancer, which has a percentile of 95.99, almost then at the 96th percentile, and including specific population vulnerabilities could be important to acknowledge and address in the application if your project has an expected benefit or impact on those specific indicators. But that concludes my overview of the Mass and Bioscreen, and as Kara mentioned earlier, we'll be holding office hours for the Mass and Bioscreen in February and March, but starting next week, to answer any questions. And in the meantime, if there are any questions about the Mass and Bioscreen, those can be directed to ej.inquiries@mass.gov. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Kara.
Thanks, Saina. Appreciate that. Awesome. So now I'm just going to kind of close us out before we transition to the Q&A period. This is the email address that you should be sending all of your questions to while the Q&A period is open. And again, those questions are all due on February 18th. And then this is also a link to our website, again, that has all the information on all of this stuff. So please, reference it throughout the time that you are applying and beyond. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, I believe Carolyn, who's going to be facilitating the Q&A discussion today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. We have been answering a lot of questions in the chat, so please do take a look there. I do want to start, since we just finished Sienna, like a really great overview of the EnviroScreen tool. I'm wondering, there's a question in the chat about data differences between the environmental justice map and the current EnviroScreen map. Would you be able to speak to a little bit just about some of the general differences in terms of like dates of data used and other things about the inputs for those maps?
Yes, so the income data that the Mass EnviroScreen is currently using comes from different data years than the data that is being used in the EJ map viewer. So that it's currently reporting different numbers because the data sources or the data years for that data is different.
Okay, great. Thank you. And if there are more specific questions, as stated, please do attend the office hours. I want to reiterate just some of the general questions that had come in that might be helpful for everyone. There were some specific questions about particular project ideas or particular grant programs. So we really do encourage you to reference the grants catalog as well as the RFR. So take a look at those with your projects in mind and explore the available opportunities. There's no limit of the amount of applications that a given entity can submit. That's really important. We had one for the EOI, but we do not have one for the RFR. Our webinars will be recorded and posted. So including the one tomorrow, the GMS webinar. And yeah, if you do have more specific GMS questions, Bill had some really helpful answers in the chat. So please do, in the Q&A box. So please do take a look at his answers there. But we definitely encourage you to attend tomorrow. I know there'll be a lot more opportunity to dive into details there. I'm going to pause. Maybe there are more questions percolating in the audience. If there are any questions that were already asked in the chat that should be highlighted, fellow panelists, feel free to jump in. I think everyone was doing a really good and quick job at answering them.
Carolyn, may I just jump in for a quick?
Please.
So there was a question about adding people as partners or consultants. So I just wanted to point out that yes, we will be able to add people to your application. It is incredibly important that the entity that will ultimately be receiving a grant or a grant contract is the entity that begins the grant application. If a grant application is started by an engineering firm, a consulting firm, a grant writer, that is not part of that organization, well, it's going to show up to us as a ineligible applicant, and it'll get rejected. So that's definitely not something that we want to see. We want to see the application come directly from that ultimate grantee. So just definitely need to reiterate as strongly as I can that whoever would be the lead partner, so if you are in a collaborative group that is coming in as a partnership, the entity that would receive the grant, that would be the financial partner, needs to be the one that begins and submits the application. There is a way It's very easy for us to set up for you to collaborate with your partners and with other individuals. So we're happy to help you with that. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. I just want to really emphasize the importance of the actual submitter of that grant application. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, that is a super important point. Okay, so more questions have come in, as I thought they might. We have, let's see, will we be able to download a copy of our completed application? I actually am not sure I know the answer to that question. Can someone speak to that?
So what you can do, yes. So what you can do, there's that application will be available to you in your GMS portal. You will be able to. It doesn't come as a PDF, but it copies and pastes very well into a word processor. So that is available to you, and the grant application will be there for you in your portal according to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's retention guidelines. So if that is a accepted application, it will be there for you for not less than 7 years after the last payment. If it is not a successful grant application, it will be there for 3 years after, a minimum of 3 years after it is decided upon. So all those answers will be there for you in your portal.
Awesome, thank you. Here is looks like a follow-up about who needs to begin the grant in the GMS. Someone is asking if there is a fiscal sponsor. They are the ones that have to start the application.
That's correct. So again, the entity that would ultimately be receiving a grant contract from EEA or one of our agencies must be the one that is the applicant of record. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Here's a question regarding the match waiver for designated small and rural communities. Does that match waiver apply for nonprofits that are applying for a grant to fund a project in that given community, or does it only qualify if the town is the applicant?
So I would say if the nonprofit is applying on behalf of towns that exhibit those traits, then the waiver would apply, but it really has to be like on behalf of those communities. So for example, we've seen like RPAs apply on behalf of some communities in the past that met the rural and small town requirements for MVP. And so they were able to apply under the no match requirement.
Okay.
I just want to add, Kara, for that question, for this person to check the eligibility for the programs, because nonprofits are not eligible for all of the programs in the One Stop as well.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Let's see. There's a question about reimbursing expenses from before the date of the grant project. And does that include deposits for equipment needing to be purchased for the project after the grant has been funded? Yes, there's no reimbursements are allowed for anything that's any purchases or expenses dated prior to the date of your grant contract execution. So we are not able to reimburse expenses for things that were done before the grant, unfortunately. Let's see, my colleagues are doing an excellent job of answering a lot of these coming in the chat, in the Q&A box. We have one question about, is there an Appendix B? Right now on Combis, there shows Appendix A and Appendix C, but no B. That I cannot, can someone speak to that?
Good question. I'll have to look into that. I think no, but we will look into that and clarify if there is supposed to be one.
Great, thank you. All right, there's a coastal zone management specific question in the chat, and I see that my CZM colleagues are answering that one or typing responses to that one. We're applying on behalf of the there's a question in the chat about RPAs applying as an RPA if we are writing an application for a municipality and we are both eligible applicants, and it is a request to pay for work that the RPA will complete. Should the municipality be the one who needs to submit the grant? Essentially, whoever is going to be the one managing the funds as they come in and receiving the funds as they come in should be the applicant. It's up to you in situations where there are multiple eligible applicants involved, such as an RPA in the municipality, as to how you divide that up. That's more of a logistics administrative question. That is something for you to decide. Can match be state funds like work completed through DLTA? Generally speaking, no, state funds cannot be used to match the grant programs that are under the Eco One Stop, as they are also state funds. But feel free to check in if you have very specific programs that you're wondering about.
Yeah, and just I would say please read the match section of the RFR because it goes over what is eligible as match.
Thank you. One question is if the project is not in an EJ community but would benefit that community in terms of management improvements and resource quality, how would that be addressed? I'm from the MVP program, so I can really only speak to what I know about MVP, but in general, there's usually an opportunity to describe how your project impacts folks outside the boundaries of your given community. So there will be room for that kind of explanation. Is there an anticipated amount of funding that will be available for the EEA Planning Assistance Grant under this Eco One Stop round? I believe the funding information is going to be in the grants catalog as well as in the RFR. Does anyone have that number off the top of their head for now?
Corinna's here. I don't know if she is able to answer that.
I am here. I do not have that off the top of my head, and we'll check in.
Thank you. Okay. Can you confirm that match can be equipment? So match in general can be cash expenses or in-kind time. So if that's the purchase of equipment that's related to your given project, then that would be a municipal cash match, if I'm understanding that correctly. Are indirect costs eligible for these grants, and will federal NICRA rates be accepted? I'm not familiar with that acronym. Are any of my other panelists familiar with that acronym?
No, I've never heard that.
Okay. I will say that in the scope and budget document, there's like a general information page that talks about basically like the rates that you could use for in-kind and things like that. So please review that and kind of craft your budget with those in mind if you need references for how to calculate things.
So a quick Google is telling me that that is an indirect cost rate, which what might be why we don't know what that is, because for us, that's not, at least for MVP, that's not how our budget is set up. So like Kara said, I would reference the RFR for the program specifics.
Great, thank you. And yes, I see someone just also put in the chat with what that is. So thank you for that. But yes, please see the specific information in the RFR. And there was a great question that was answered in that chat that was more specifically about the culvert and bridge programs. So thank you, Holden, for answering that. Okay, we made it through our current list, but we can give it a beat as more questions may come in if we still have 10 minutes. There may be typing going on. I wish we could see little dots for everyone who may be typing.
I think the big takeaway here is don't wait till the last minute. If you have a question, please look at the RFR because the answer is probably in there. And if it's not in there or you're still confused, you can send an email to the Eco One Stop email, which is eco1stop@mass.gov.
Hi, this is Corinne again for the Planning Assistance Grant. So our funding amount is TBD, but we are anticipating for FY27 around $1 million from the capital budget.
Thank you, Corinne. Thanks for that follow-up. We did have a few more questions come in. So a follow-up on the deposit question. So the question about putting deposits on equipment purchased before a grant contract, that does also apply to the match requirement. So the match funding must also have been spent within the grant period, meaning when the grant contract begins and the end of the fiscal year.
There is an exception to that for cooling corridors and tree watering. So please read the RFR for that. But what Carolyn said is correct in the vast majority of instances.
Oh, thanks for that, though. Good to know. What is the difference between the RFR and the application? Great question. This is a grants lingo question, and I had no idea before I had this job either. So the RFR is the request for responses. So that is what is now a giant document because it includes all of the applications for all of the 7 grant programs included in the Eco One Stop. So the MVP application is a part of that. So take a look. The RFR is where all of the details are of all of the grant programs, including eligibility requirements, matching, all of these things that we're discussing, as well as the actual meat of the application. However, you will be using the grant management system, the online platform, to actually complete and submit an application. Let's see. Can you talk about a letter of support from a municipality? So generally speaking, if you are a municipality who is applying for a grant, we usually look for a letter from that municipality, a letter of support, particularly in particular committing to providing a local match for that given project. But if you are working, so say if there's a regional project and there's a lead municipality and other partner municipalities, make sure you include letters from those municipalities as well. Anytime there's a partner being named in a grant application, it's a good idea to submit a letter of support from them. I see Corinne is typing a question that was specific to the EEA Planning Assistance Grant. What about a 501c3? So if you do have if you're any partner, whether it's a nonprofit or municipality or an RPA, partners that are going to be involved in a particular grant project, it's a great idea, best practice, to submit a letter of support from them. Does the letter of support need to be from the select board or the town administrator? I'm not sure if there's a preference in terms of who signs a letter. It should be someone from the town that has authority, fiscally speaking, financial authority.
Yeah, I think there's details about that in the RFR, but I can look quickly while we're answering another question.
Okay, thank you. Yes, our theme is see the RFR. There's a lot of details in there. Okay, let's see. Okay. So we will be posting, again, the webinar recordings, the PDF of the presentations, and all the question and answers that have come in, during all the webinars are going to be posted as the formal question and answer period that comes along with any grant RFR. Someone remind me what the date is for Q&As more broadly.
It's February 18th.
Thank you. February 18th is a final day to submit your questions. You can submit questions through Combis or through the Eco One Stop email address. That's eco1stop@mass.gov.
And I just looked, and the match letter is supposed to be sent in by an authorized signatory of the applicant.
Great, thank you, Kara.
So someone who is authorized to sign the contract with us. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for facilitating, Carolyn. And we appreciate all the questions. Again, please look through everything and send us any further questions you have by that February 18th deadline. And we'll be happy to answer them that way. And yeah, we'll be posting all this information so that you can reference it later. Again, please come to the GMS webinar tomorrow and the Mass and Virus Screen office hours if you have questions about that tool. But again, thanks for spending your time with us today. And we will, I'm sure, talk to you all very soon. And can't wait to see your applications. Thank you.
Thank you.